I'd just like to thank Carol and Emma for that session. It was a really fascinating set of data and a lot of key messages. I think I mentioned earlier on that personally I'm very passionate about the whole inclusion and young people in our sector. And I appreciate that it can be difficult. In my own experience, I would just like to give you one thought on that, which is scrap all your recruitment processes, recruit on attitude, and if HR tells you you can't do it, ignore them. So with that, I'm really looking forward to the next panel, which is going to be hosted by Fraser Wilson, who's a partner, head of financial services here for PwC in Scotland. Fraser and I do a lot of work together, and I'd just like to publicly thank PwC for the work that they did on our strategy. So Fraser, I'm going to invite you to the stage and welcome your panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. And Sandy, thank you for that introduction. As you say, my name is Fraser Wilson, and I've got the privilege of leading our financial services practice here in Scotland. And actually, for the next sort of half an hour, 45 minutes, we've got a panel discussion here, and I'm going to let my panelists introduce themselves. But what we're really going to do is pick up on some of the themes that came out of those early keynote speeches this morning around about the growth pipeline and how it's really important that we focus on recruiting, training and supporting a diverse workforce, because it's so important to the future of our industry. And I think it's fascinating just to step back and take some of those numbers that were referred to by Sandy and the Minister this morning. We've got about 145,000 skilled, high-paid jobs here in Scotland, but over 2 million skilled, high-paid jobs in the UK. That's a tremendous asset, but we need to make sure we nurture that asset and think about how we grow and develop that as we go forward. And hopefully that's some of the conversation we can pick up just now. So in terms of introduction, rather than me introduce my panel, I'm going to get each of them just to share their own sort of personal story, a little bit of an introduction as to why you're passionate and your perspective on this agenda, and therefore we'll open up a conversation afterwards. And Sandra, can we start with yourself and just work back down towards myself?
Thank you, Fraser. So yes, I'm Sandra Wallace. I'm a partner, employment partner at law firm DLA Piper. I've been at the firm all my career. I also sit on the executive of that firm now as Joint Managing Director UK and Europe, and have been in that role just over 4 years. I'm also the Midlands Chair of TheCityUK, a position that I really enjoy because I hope I bring a regional perspective. I'm born and bred in Birmingham in the Midlands and still operate and work and live there. I'm passionate about this agenda, I suppose, for various reasons. I think I have an obligation in my leadership role to drive and make sure the firm that I work in and support in our local community and globally is representative of those places. I feel particularly passionate about it because if you were to ask me, would I ever end up in a role like this? The answer is quite simply no. I was the daughter of a cleaner and a painter and decorator. I'm one of six. I'm number 5 to go to university. None of my brothers and sisters went before me. I'm a mother of 3, and in various stages in my career, I felt out of place. I felt I didn't belong. I felt that the profession, the industry wasn't representative of who I was or where I came from or the challenges that I faced. And you go into the job and you get those roles and you come through those adversities and the difficulties you face along the way. A lot of those financial, in my case, and you think, actually, if I had to go through all these obstacles to get to where I am now, how many people must get left behind? How many people must think, actually, it's just too difficult? And as a result of that, I think it's important for me, and I'm sure everyone on this panel and you today, is to do what we can genuinely to change that and remove those barriers, so at least we are not only inclusive but representative of the people we serve.
And thank you. That's a great segue into some of my experience as well, in terms of how difficult it can be for a lot of young people nowadays to get not only into the sector, but actually to understand their true value. So I'm Naomi. I work in part of the NatWest Group Early Career Leadership team, and as well as all the great work that I think we do in terms of the graduate, intern and apprenticeship space, a couple of years ago I was tasked with looking at what we could do in schools. I think my brief was literally as broad as that. And it was much more with a purpose-led lens. So Alison's strategy for the bank is very much around a purpose-led business to help people thrive. And in order to do that, we really need to start much younger. And we really need to help young people understand what they are capable of, particularly when they've been told that they're not capable of something, or where their expectation has maybe been lower than they would ultimately want to set themselves that expectation. We've touched on it earlier in terms of social mobility. My father himself came from India, had a very rudimental sort of education, ended up leaving India in order to follow the bright lights to the UK and all the promises of work over here. And he really instilled in us the importance of education and ultimately really understanding what you could really achieve. And from a personal perspective, that's my passion. That's what I want to pass on today. So a lot of what we do is around supporting youth employment. I lead our youth employability education programme for the bank called Career Sense, which is only 18 months old, so relatively still new. So looking to learn a lot from today's sessions as well. That's me.
Thank you. My name's Pav. I'll probably start with where I'm at today and then just take a step back. So I work for Fidelity International. I lead global teams in the UK and Germany and India. And I'm really proud to work for an organisation that actually factually and tangibly acts on inclusivity and diversity. If I take a step back, my journey here is I was born and bred in Bradford. My father was a taxi driver and my mother worked in the mills. We all went to university. I worked at Yorkshire Building Society for a subsidiary firm called Yorkshire. My in-laws still think that I am a bank teller and give out money to individuals. They don't understand the industry that I'm in, and to be quite honest, sometimes it takes too long to try and explain it, so I don't. I think from my perspective, I worked in the north for the vast majority of my career, and I felt as though I belonged. I grew up with the individuals there. We had the same accents, so it was all quite normal. When I moved to the south, I suddenly felt this imposter syndrome and felt as though, actually, I don't fit in here. The buildings were huge, there was lots of decor, there was lots of art, people were bringing coffee to you, they were dressed in waistcoats. So that's the first time I felt as though I didn't belong in the industry. But I pushed ahead. And then I started to realise, actually, I think I've earned a seat at the table here because I've got the skills, the capability and the behaviours to make a difference. So it's about individuals sometimes crossing that boundary themselves, but the organisation giving you the ability to be yourself and grow in the role. So that's what I'm hoping to talk about today, to share my experiences and just to challenge ourselves a little bit as a sector as to what we need to do to create that environment so people can flourish and grow. Thank you.
Good morning, I'm Gregg Hutchings. I'm the Programme Director at the Financial Services Skills Commission. And I'm probably going to talk quite a bit in this panel about why I think skills is the solution, so no surprise there. But I just want to admit I'm a recent joiner of the sector, about 5 years ago relatively, and that has been quite an eye-opener for me. I'm part of, hopefully, the total people we want to attract into the sector, bringing a diversity of ideas and people into the sector, so that's been quite an eye-opener for me. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you. So I think we've got a fantastic panel with some really diverse views and perspectives. In terms of how we'll run this, you can see on the screen we've got a poll similar to the prior panel. Please encourage people to vote. We will pick it up as we go through the narrative. We've also got the opportunity for you to ask questions either through the app, online, which I can pick up, or as the conversation goes, if we want to take direct questions out of the room, we can also do that. I think the other piece for me actually was really interesting, just listening to that last conversation around about some of the perspectives of the sector, because actually my own view is we're doing some things incredibly well. but it felt from the last conversation that maybe we're not telling that story and we're not getting the credit for some of the things we're doing around about talent generation, access to roles, diversity. Interested in sort of collective views. And Sandra, perhaps from what you've done in the Midlands, you've got interaction with the government, you've got that Midlands chair role. What's your take on what else can we do to tell the story positively?
I think you're absolutely right. There was so much good work going on in the sector. People are looking at their entry-level recruitment. They're looking at where they have gone to recruit. I think they are taking a much broader approach on looking regionally, going out to communities to talk about the sector and to really look at ways they've recruited. The apprenticeships is a lot more open. There's a lot more contextualised recruitment, not so much focus on where people went to school or university they went to, but just really, the attitude point we were just talking about. What do we need actually for this position rather than what grade of people got? So that work has really gone on, and I've seen that across the piece. And just taking from a Midlands perspective, I know that a lot of the universities there are really driving that initiative in terms of working with industry, working with the sector to make sure they're designing courses that really are speaking to the sector so that students are getting closer to it. There's a further education college that has a specific course on financial and professional services that is bringing in students at 16 years old into not only teaching them the skills required, but also introducing them into the sector through work experience, etc. I think where we need to just think about is at senior levels. How do we make sure the decision makers, how are we making sure the people that are actually going to be running the products, the services, and making those decisions are actually coming through from a really diverse population? I think that's the work that the sector has really had to grapple with, but we've heard about the task force, of which I was a chair of the Socioeconomic Diversity Task Force, and improving progression at some more senior levels. And that we've got now a 5-point plan to try and improve that across the sector. So.
And it still feels quite like we're still scratching the surface though with it, doesn't it? Because there are still too many young people coming out of school that don't fully understand those skills, that are lacking good quality careers education whilst they're in school, that maybe don't have role models around them, let alone understand the industry. We take on a number of young people on either, a mix of insight weeks and work experiences, and some of the repeatable things that they say to us are similar to what you were saying, Pav, earlier. I couldn't visualize myself in this building, which, just taking a step into the building is a big win for them at times. And I assumed that you need to have a maths degree in order to do whatever it is you guys do in this building, and that all you do is sit behind and crunch numbers, again, to your parents' point of view. So there's still quite a lot of myths I think we need to start changing, both within the schools themselves, but also within the local communities, and whether that's parents and carers as well.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that, I think it needs to start before they get to the university stage, because as individuals we start thinking about what we want to do in the future quite at an early stage. So if we can start helping them shape their thoughts and ideas, I think we'll then be able to create a talent pipeline that we can actually benefit from. So get into the schools a bit earlier, don't leave it till the higher education and university and A-levels, because that might be a bit too late, and just normalise it a little bit. I've got twins at home, both at 24. One works in financial services and one works in medicine. The individual who works in the medical trade, they just don't understand financial services, and they do think we're greedy and we're expensive, etc. So it's just normalising what we do. Every sector has its own challenges, and let's not be afraid. Let's be a bit brave and bold about the storytelling that we need to do.
And just to build on that, at the Commission we've been looking a lot at how we both attract a workforce that we need, but also how we retain the workforce when we get them in. A big part of what we've been doing is looking at how we reskill our existing workforce and actually help them adapt to the future challenges of the sector. And a big part of what we've been looking at is that the skills challenge in the sector, which we know is developing all the time. It's the nature of skills and work in the sector is changing all the time. I don't need to tell you that. But that represents an opportunity and a threat for diversity and inclusion. If we want to create a diverse and included workforce, we need to evaluate those opportunities and the threats potentially towards them. The nature of skills is changing. We're seeing more increasing highly skilled jobs in the sector, increased technological needs, but also the needs for new behaviours and new ways of thinking. And that's a big opportunity, the thing that we've been looking at through our future skills framework. How do we get different pipelines of skills into the sector, not just early careers, but experienced professionals, but how do we take our existing workforce on the journey towards those skills needs and fulfilling them for their careers? So I think there's a big opportunity around attracting talent, but also taking people on a journey. I think the threat is where we start to take our eye off the diversity inclusion agenda. As we do that, if we focus too hard on the skills side, are we checking ourselves against our diversity and inclusion goals? And that's something that we want to marry together through the Commission.
Yeah, some really helpful thoughts, and I think what comes through there for me is you've got challenges at the leadership and the diversity of what we think of as the leaders in industry, the socio-economic work over the last sort of couple of days as that's come out shows us that. I think we'll perhaps look at that. We've also then picked up retention of existing people and how we use them and sort of support their growth through their own careers. But actually I think for me, let's go back to that point of attraction. And Pav, you mentioned sort of starting younger, starting the schools. Perhaps you can expand on what else you think we could do there. And then Naomi, I'm keen to get your experience directly of what you've done at NatWest. And actually, can you share with us what's working and what's not worked? Because I think we can all learn from some of the stuff you've got. So Pav, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a recognition that, you know, the generation that we need to talk to, that they actually want different things out of life. The way that we worked is very different to the way that they're going to work. The 9 to 5 hours just don't suit them. They want a lot more from the organisations than just the wage packet that they take home. It is about their social life. It's about their well-being. So it's talking to them in a language that they understand. You know, gamification, bringing things to life for them. I think will benefit of getting into schools and telling the story, using the tools that are actually relevant to them. And I think, like Sandy said, I'm a firm believer in, you know, bringing people in if they've got the right attitude and the right behaviours to learn. You can always skill people up, but if they don't have the right behaviours to start with, the investment that we put into skilling the individuals, it's not going to stick. It's not going to be sticky enough for the industry. So get into the schools earlier, use the tools and language that lands with them, and take them through the journey. And I think that will be a positive outcome.
I think you've almost got to make an assumption, I believe, and I can only speak for schools and the colleges that I interact with. There is still a lot quite lacking in the careers advice support that's available. There's so much pressure to fulfill a curriculum, to go through other aspects of learning, that I think it's really important that we think about how we engage with schools. I absolutely agree early. But also, we don't just talk financial services or being a lawyer, or as a sector, we employ so many people separate to being a lawyer or being, you know, in financial services. We employ marketing people, HR people, you know, IT, and there's so many roles that we probably don't, when we go into schools, we don't talk about all of those as well. We talk about being attractive to young people that have a different perspective. Let's talk about some of those other roles that they generally don't associate with our sector, because I think that's quite important as well. And I think you have to go in. I mean, one of the things I often think about is parents' evening. You know, now we're starting to get back into school and parents are coming back into schools as well. Should we be literally in a stand in the corner of the school telling the parents about what we do as well? Because they are not introducing. They're not talking to their children about it. That would have been so important for me if my parents had been talking to me about, why don't you think about this? As well as the children having to go out and find the information as well. So I think that's really important.
I think it's such a good point about the information you give to parents and carers, because just out of personal experience, having currently mentoring a young person through the Career Ready programme, if you're not involved in that, absolutely suggest that's maybe what action you take from today. And he was having a really difficult conversation at home with his mum and dad about what their expectations were of him in terms of a specific university, a specific course, and everything else was deemed as a failure. But actually, coming into an organisation like ours and then meeting some of our apprentices and grads, so to your question, it was actually giving them the experience for them to be able to articulate it to their parents, to take their parents on the journey has been really powerful for that individual. And I think being able to show them what an organisation is actually like and focus on the skill, not the job. Because as we've been talking about today, it's changing so quickly that education certainly can't keep pace. We struggle to keep pace with it sometimes. But if you focus on the skill, the key thing is that you're then transferable. And to your point, Greg, about then moving across industry sector, because when we hire, we don't just hire from financial services, we're looking across sectors.
We've got some great questions coming through, which actually play into the dialogue. The one that I guess I'm just going to pick up, and it takes slightly to Sandy's comment as we introduced this session, which is recruit on attitude and ignore HR. So the specific question is really around about how can the industry reform recruitment practices that we therefore unintentionally prioritise the kind of polished candidate who turns up at our door as opposed to perhaps the best candidate who's come from a different background, less privileged, and doesn't have that insight or the experience or having walked through the glass doors of the building. I guess we've all got a role to play. Naomi, I guess I'll come back to you specifically as you're doing that. How do you think we can bypass that? And then I guess others to throw in your perspectives on how we bypass that recruitment challenge.
It's a mix of things. There's no one right answer. So there's a bit around, education of whoever's supporting that process, because although you could have the application without, name and detail and all of that, they will eventually meet the individual. So you still need to make sure that there's no unconscious bias there. So that could be about what school they've gone to. It could be about how they're speaking. It could be about how they're dressed on the day. Right through to where you're actually physically recruiting the individuals from. So don't just expect the applications to come to you. You go into the communities, you go into the colleges, the universities, the schools, because that's where you're going to source the right individuals. And think about your partnerships. So a lot of, I guess our hiring's relatively mixed in terms of if it's experienced hiring, quite a lot of it will be direct hiring or occasionally through agencies. So if you're using an agency, you need to be really careful about what their practices are and really knowing that. But if you're doing then early recruitment activity, making sure that if you are going out to universities, that's diverse. So we review that on an annual basis to make sure that we're not just going to the most elite universities, and we are being quite mindful of that. And then I guess the final part is just around making sure that you are telling that story in the marketplace and going out into the community, whether it's through things like work experiences or mentoring, so that it opens up young people's eyes to the industry, not just you as an employer.
Yeah. Greg, did you want to come in on that?
Yeah, just on the experienced hires piece, a lot of the conversations within our membership have been around, obviously, how do you attract people from outside the sector, those experienced professionals that come in. But a lot of conversations turn to the kind of hiring mindset. If we're serious about recruiting for skills and capability, for attitude, these things, and moving away from the experience model, how do we sustain that through the recruitment process? Because organisations may start off with big goals around that, but then is the hiring manager empowered to act in line with that policy, or in the spirit of that policy, or do they feel they need to, because of risk or because of the choice they need to make, default back to the CV with the experience or the reassuring CV? So how do we work with managers through the organisation who are doing the hiring to bring that person in and not see that as a risk? So a lot of the conversations are focused on that.
Okay. We then sort of think about the reskilling aspect, and actually there's quite a few questions coming through on that, and one is very directive at you, Greg, so I have no choice but to direct it straight to you. It says, question to Greg. Does he have some really good examples of organisations reskilling existing employees?
Yeah, well, there's loads, and this is something we focused on. We focused on the business case that we developed with PwC. We know that PwC is interested in this area as well as a firm. So a lot of the big four who are working with us closely have got examples of larger scale reskilling programs that are moving people into new roles. NatWest is one of them, in terms of developing a pathway out of sunsetting jobs and into sunrising jobs. And that's a big phrase that people talk a lot about. And that investment obviously saves the firm money. The business case points to that. It increases loyalty to firm, it actually renews kind of the colleagues' engagement with the firm, but also keeps that product knowledge, keeps that institutional knowledge that we need. And we've been focused on different ways to do that. There's great examples right across our membership that look at that. I think what we're trying to look at now is how we can go to scale. You know, if you take someone from a customer-facing role and can reskill them, retrain them to become a software developer or to move into data analytics, that's a great step. That is possible. All the firms that we work with are either doing that or looking to do that. But there's kind of stages before that. Where's the kind of learning culture, learning programs you need to support that? Those cross-skilling programs. We're not going to take everybody at every point in their career into a new role like that. People have different choices to make at a personal level. But there is opportunities to move, and not just within job families. People talk a lot about how people can move from customer-facing roles to other types of customer roles. There is opportunities, if we present them in the right way with the right story about how it's done, to move people across into other areas of the business.
Thanks, Greg. I'm conscious that question was directed at you, but equally I want to open it up to the other three parts. We all operate in large organisations. There's clearly opportunity for agility of our staff and that reskilling, but how do your organisations support this, and can we share examples for the wider room?
Yeah, Greg mentioned that NatWest are doing quite a bit in this space, and it's relatively new in terms of our internal mobility hub that we call, and whilst that's not my area, I see what's coming out of that in terms of people reskilling into data or into software engineering, and maybe looking at how we utilise levy funding, so trying to think a little bit more creatively about what is already an option. It also helps us when we're storytelling for attraction anyway, because we're then saying we're supporting the employee, and if you want to stay with us as an organisation, always mindful that there will be people that want to exit at some point, and that's okay, then we will try our best to support you, because it's about that continual learning. It's almost like it's a bit like we're kind of looking more at internal gigs as well as the other thing that we're doing, which isn't necessarily reskilling people for an immediate new job, but it's how can we get people different experiences and skills without them necessarily having to change job to try that and maybe to realise it's not for them. So you can advertise an internal gig at our place, and that could be anything from a couple of days or a couple of weeks right up to a number of months, where you are able to support a particular project to gain new exposure.
We do something similar at Fidelity. We've got a talent marketplace. Okay. So you're able to create a profile on the marketplace with regards to what your passions are, what your skills are, etc., and where you'd like to get to in your career. And then equally, I, as a functional lead, if I've got a need and I can't recruit the headcount or I want to give a stretch opportunity, I can post the opportunity on the talent marketplace. And you meet the individuals, and then you can give them a stretch opportunity to develop their skills, but equally I get something out of it in return. And we do participate in the levy and all the other training opportunities that are given out to individuals. And we do job swaps as well. I'm a product of a job swap. I swapped running contact centres for operational teams, so that there is some value in doing that as well.
Sandra?
Just one, I suppose, note I would make to people to think about, and I'll make it sort of on a personal level. There were opportunities, and there will be opportunities in our organisations for people to reskill and move job sets, exactly what you've just said. But there will be lots of people that feel they've reached their limit, especially if you're from a lower socioeconomic background. I don't think there's any job move I've made where I've not thought, actually, I think this is it now, this is really it. I just don't think this is the next stages for me. Or I see this person doing that role and that person doesn't look like me. So whilst we might have the ability to reskill, while we might have lots of opportunities, you've got to also make people feel that it's for them as well. Because you'll have people in your organisations that think, okay, I've come in as a cashier or whatever it might be, and that's my limit. Running this branch or whatever it might be, that's not for me. And that is something you've really got to watch out for, because you might have the talent really under your nose and not realising it. It's much easier to get entry-level people in. It's much harder to, when you're looking for the skills at the higher levels, you might be thinking, as an industry, it's really hard to attract. They might actually be right in front of you, but they have self-selected themselves out for lots of reasons. So you've got to make sure we are creating an environment where we're storytelling and people understand that it's possible to start as in X role and the sky's the limit. But people will select out, and they might do that if they don't believe the environment is such that people like them become the top level or the programmers or whatever it might be. So that's just one thing I would say to watch out for.
So I think there's another question come through which picks up some of the theme here, and we've talked about the work the Skills Commission has done, what our individual organisations can do, but with a recognition that the skills the industry need will continue to evolve. Reskilling is a critical component of how we might address that skills challenge. The question that's come through is, do we think that either the regulators, the government bodies could and should do more to support that reskilling, and if so, what would we be asking of those bodies? Again, Greg, given your starting point, I'll perhaps pose that one to you first.
Yeah. How to approach this one? I mean, one thing we've been looking at the Commission, and bearing in mind this is quite a complex area, it's different in each nation, we've been looking at the potential for apprenticeships and reskilling, and how the approach to apprenticeships might be adapted, or certain flexes found in the apprenticeship model to allow reskilling to take place without sort of throwing out the ethos and what apprenticeships are for. And we do think there's a lot of potential there. It's finding the way to package that, thinking about actually how do you transition people into these roles and genuinely put them on an apprenticeship route. So you can move people, maybe it is about the steps you do before someone joins an apprenticeship, actually as part of a mid-career reskilling programme. And we think there's a lot of potential there. So I would say, let's talk about the levy, let's talk about what we need to do around the different approaches to the apprenticeship model.
Anyone else got thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think we can all do a little bit more than what we are doing. I think that as a sector, we just need to be very clear with what our ask is, and then work with the regulators and the government to say, look, this is what we want to do, this is how we want to do it, and this is the support we think we need from you to be able to do it. So I think we need to take some accountability ourselves and have something that we go and ask for, and then work collaboratively to deliver that.
And I probably don't have much different to add to that, other than we just need to be really mindful of when we're approaching apprenticeships, remembering the ethos of apprenticeships, to your point, Greg, and actually, even when we're looking at social mobility, making sure that we are not just looking at lower socioeconomic background and the highest academic achievers within that, because we then, to your point, rule a lot of people out that just haven't been given the tools to achieve better.
Yeah. Can I just pause and check? Does anyone in the room have a question that you want to put your hand up and raise to the panel?
In front of there.
There's one in the middle over here. That's okay.
Hi, Fiona Finch here from HSBC. I put this online, but based on what Naomi's actually just said, where do you think, how can we get better with neurodiversity and recruitment and skills? Because that is a group of people who struggle in school, struggle in interviews, but can be huge contributors. And I think the discussion's not really there yet in that space. I'd be interested to hear from you all.
I don't mind taking that first. I think it's a really good question, and definitely the industry as a whole should be challenged more on that. So whenever we are looking to design anything, we absolutely take that lens. We have internal employer-led networks that support us in all those spaces and actually help us, I guess, consult with employees that have lived experience that can then challenge those processes. Are they perfect? No. Could they be better? Yes. So I think we at least know that there's things that we can do to fix there. I think the other part for us is around partnerships. So are we partnering with the right organisations that can help us do that and that can help us assess frameworks that we're using and the tools that we're using?
Yeah, just echo that. That's something that we've started to do as an organisation. I think the conversation is coming to the forefront now, but we are using the lived experiences of our employees to help educate us as an organisation, and then reaching out to the professionals to make sure that the decisions that we're making are the right decisions.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else in the room got a question you'd like to pose? One over the bottom again.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Stephen Robertson. I'm a finance consultant for Capgemini and a firm representative for SFE Young Professionals. My question is more around something that Pav touched on in developing the sense of belonging when you join one of these big firms. Do you think that these big firms can do more to help develop that sense of belonging when people arrive with maybe what you hinted at with imposter syndrome? People from all types of backgrounds as well, maybe people from less privileged backgrounds that are entering new environments, and people from more privileged backgrounds which are tackling with expectations of success, like Naomi touched on. Do you think these firms can do more to help them feel more at home?
Yeah, definitely. I think just to normalise it a little bit, because I think that those were all the perceptions that I created myself, and they weren't a reality because of what I saw. As I got to speak to individuals and as I got to know the leadership, it was all normalised a little bit for me. That sometimes I still had this sense of elitism with regards to the industry and the individuals that I might have spoken to, but the vast majority broke down the barriers themselves. I've got a son who also works at Fidelity, and I'm currently helping him because he feels sometimes a little bit excluded, more because of where he's come from and his very broad northern accent. So I think it's incumbent upon the leadership in the organisations to help break down those barriers, and that's something that I'm really passionate about, because we talk about attracting the right talent and retaining the right talent. The leadership that we have has a significant role to play in that. So if our leaders are not equipped to be able to deal with the needs of the future talent, they are not going to stay. So, those hours of working, what's in it for me, the leadership needs to understand that the old way of doing things isn't going to work well for the next generation. So I think that's important.
Gregg, did you want to put?
Yeah, just to add on that, I mean, we've been looking a lot at the retention piece from an inclusion perspective, that sense of belonging, and we're talking with our members a lot about if you're going to want to retain people, how are you making sure people feel included, and that's why we produced a guide which looks at how you measure inclusion within firms, and we did a pilot piece of research which looked at a lot of range of issues, including being stereotyped or kind of sense of belonging inside firms. So if firms aren't measuring it, how do they know where some of the problems are? Or at least having some of the conversations. And then how do you make sure the investments you're making in skills are being targeted in the right places, or where there might be extra effort needs to be made? So if you want to get people on that internal mobility journey, take all these reskilling opportunities, how do you make sure someone feels included to get on that journey? Because if they don't get on that journey, that can compound that feeling of not being included on another level. So we need that was my kind of discussion about the threat. The threat is there, I think, if we don't look at measuring and understanding that journey.
Yeah, that's really helpful. We touched on earlier that point on leadership, and I think we've got a room today of sort of senior leaders across the industry. Pav, I think the example there is incredibly powerful. Sandra, you talked about that imposter syndrome as well, even at more senior levels of your own career. I'm interested in your perspective on picking up perhaps Pav's point about what else can we do as leaders to retain and nurture the growth of the talent, because I think one of the biggest risks is we lose the talent we've got, as opposed to we're talking a lot about attracting new talent. So that leadership point, and what else do we need to do?
I think it's got to be authentic leadership. We've got to actually believe that having a diverse workforce matters. And I think if you do anything today, go back and think, do we actually believe it? Does it, when the day job, when the times get tough, when the economy's changing, do we actually believe it? And that has to come from the top. But also, it's got to be the case that people on the front line, people in middle management, they believe that you believe it. So you've got to be talking about it, and you've got to be talking about it just as much as you're talking about the bottom line, your profitability, your average rate build, and all the other things that I talk about in my business. I've got to be talking about this as much. And if people think, okay, she takes it just as seriously as all the other metrics, key metrics that are driving our business, then they're going to say, okay, right, I believe, so what does it look like? What have you got to do? And I think then we've got to story tell. Because you'll only believe if you belong, if you're hearing people talking about their story, their journeys, the things they've learned that have worked for them. And I don't just mean people from a low socioeconomic background and black people, I mean people that went to Eton, and I think this thing is about inclusivity. So the whole journey, you know, if I went to Eton, what was really good for me? What worked for me? How do I network? What things did I find that were really useful that got me to where I am? That is just as relevant as me saying, this is the challenges I face, this is how I dealt with them, etc. It's the whole story. And if people are storytelling as well as driving it throughout their business, I think then it's harder for people to say, okay, I don't feel like I belong. You know, there's also going to be things that you've put up as barriers internally, but the external world is telling you something different.
Some great points there on that authenticity of leadership, and I think the storytelling. Just as we start to draw this conversation to a close, can we put back up the results of the poll, just so we can see where that got to? So we asked the question really around what would you prioritise? And I think there's a mixed set of views. Gregg, unfortunately, reskilling's not winning here, so you've got some more to do in your story. I think there's been for me a really rich conversation. I hope that's felt across the room. Just as we draw to a close, I'm going to ask each of you for a sort of final closing remark. You've seen what the audience would prioritise. I don't want that to lead the witness or your answers in any way, shape or form. But I'm going to ask each of you, what one thing would you want to do, and would you personally stand behind around about how do we sort of grow our talent base from a sort of maximising diverse and inclusive workforce, because it's so critical for the future of our industry. And I'll leave that open to who wants to pick that one up first.
I'll go first from an early career, because then it maybe goes through the, I guess, the career that people might have. So it would be around being authentic and actually doing something here, you know, in terms of supporting young people. So regardless of what your company can and can't do, will or will not do, you as an individual, collectively from this room, the power in this room is strong. You as an individual can go away today and do something positive. So whether that is personally getting into a school, whether that is personally mentoring somebody or offering a placement to somebody that otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity, then go and do that. And I suppose just for all of us to then role model, as you say, that storytelling and be out there talking about it as part of our day job.
Thank you.
I think from my perspective, I think as Sandra said, that you know there will be some individuals that will just get missed in this whole journey, and if I see any of those individuals, I think you can identify some behaviours and skill sets and capabilities they might have, but they're not stepping forward. Lean into the situation and try and talk to them, mentor, coach, and see if you can help them through the journey. And this is uncomfortable. These conversations are uncomfortable. So I'd ask you all to embrace the fact that it's uncomfortable and react with a positive reaction.
I would say reassure those people you want to bring into the sector that not only would they belong to it, but they would have the investment in them to develop the careers and skills that they want, that they can actually bring their skills in and continue to thrive and develop if they're coming into the sector as an experienced hire. And also think about how you're attracting those people in the first place. It's not just an image problem, it is about people wanting meaningful, purposeful careers, and actually how do we make sure people understand what the sector's about so that we can bring them in.
Sandra?
Well, I'm going to give a bit of a shameless plug to the research, the 2 years of research we've just done on the Socioeconomic Diversity Task Force in Financial Professional Services. Look at the report and see how you can take forward some of the initiatives that we've talked about there, that looks at understanding the workforce, collecting the data to at least understand what your workforce looks like, storytelling, leading, and setting yourselves targets for improving the diversity. If you genuinely believe it will help you improve your industry going forward.
Thank you. So I think as we sort of conclude, we've got a phenomenally talented workforce in our industry. The Government Minister has made it really clear this continues to be a growth industry for the Scottish and the UK economy. We need to continue to nurture and pull forward the future talent, as well as attract, retain and support our current talent. I think we've had some excellent discussions, some really good perspectives. Thank you very much for your thoughts and views. And I believe, Sandy, have you got a few seconds before we close?
Thanks very much, Fraser, and the panel. Certainly, speaking personally, I could have sat and listened to that all day. I think it's such a hugely important topic. Just a couple of thoughts. We did a piece of work, and one of the stats that we uncovered, which I think really encapsulates some of what we're talking about amongst young people, was that where a young person had no connection with industry in school, so they had no one in their family, no friends, whatever, less than 8% of them would consider our industry as an attractive option. Where they had a family member already in the industry or a family friend, that went up to almost 40%. So there's a huge gap between people, young people who understand a bit about our industry and those that don't. And as I said earlier, we contributed and worked with the Skills Commission on the work they were doing. I would encourage you just to, if over lunch, our skills action plans lying out there. We talk about skills pathway and promotion, which is some of the things that come through in the survey. So I would encourage you to do that. And also, personally, I'd just like to thank Naomi for the plug for Career Ready. As the chair of Career Ready, I would encourage you all to go out there and sign up. It is a tremendous programme. So anyway, with that, enough marketing from me. Lunch now, so we need to be back here at 2 o'clock sharp. We've got a great guest speaker coming along for 2 o'clock. So encourage you to go out, enjoy your lunch and network and be back in here by 2 o'clock. Thank you very much.